Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Power of Our Story. Today we have Jonathon Alcocer, and we're so grateful that he's here. He has been so open, sharing his story that has brought such a response from people because it's just touched so many of us to the core. So I'm going to read something that he wrote. The title of his talk today is Battle Tested. And he writes, more often than not, those of us that have been to hell on the battlefield, those of us that have had to respond to a call where the lives of innocent people have been taken, those of us that have attempted to resuscitate a victim only to have them die in our arms, or those of us that have been a victim of rape or domestic violence, will describe ourselves as broken or damaged goods. The scars and wounds we carry become our identity. They become the focal point of our lives. And when they do, guilt kicks in. When scars and wounds turn to guilt, we start to question our decisions. We continuously play the trauma over and over through our minds, reliving it play by play, stopping at certain points and telling ourselves, I should have done this or that. Sound familiar? Because I have personally done everything I just mentioned after experiencing everything I talked about, and it damn near killed me. So his bio served 22 years in the military, in which he did 10 deployments all over the world. He has been to Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Syria, Kosovo, Africa, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, to name a few. He was a police officer in Arizona for 3 years. He has suffered from PTSD since childhood. He's a victim of domestic violence, molestation, rape, and kidnapping. Now he spends his time building a ministry for vets, first responders, nurses, EMT, counselors, or anyone that has been what he calls battle tested. And Jonathon, it is such an honor to have you. You are my brother, even though this is the first time I've actually seen you. So welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I mean that, it really is.
Well, tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and share your story of faith and hope. We'd love to hear everything you want to share.
So, I've been thinking about how I wanted to do this, and I chose that title for a reason, because, like I said in that post, I don't look at people, first and foremost, the ministry that I'm building right now is all geared towards vets and first responders, just because it's been a part of my community. It's been a part of me for such a long time. But it's also meant for those who have suffered through that type of stuff, who've had the suicidal ideations, who've had those thoughts, who have written those letters, who are in hell right now. And that's what I determined to be battle tested. I said it in my post, you don't have to be a soldier to ever live through a battle. We go through battles every day, some worse than others, and I wanted to make it, my editor, one of my editors had commented on one of the things that I wrote. And so to kind of clear things up, what I tell people now is, we may not have experienced the same things. I've may have experienced something that happened to you, but we took it differently. But at the end, we found ourselves in the same place. No matter how we got there, no matter if it was a family member who molested you, or the priest, or you went through some type of traumatic event, whatever the case may be, we all share different feelings about it. Some I may have hit on the mark, other ones I may have missed by a mile. But the end result is we've all ended up at that same place where the thought of ending our life was our only hope. So it's when I initially wrote that, And there's going to be more that are coming out. But what I was writing to was on the last day, on my last attempt, I went to church. That's where I found myself. And it wasn't to make peace with God or anything. It was to make peace with what I was about to do. I was already set. My mind had already been made up. I just loved my church. I loved going there. I wasn't there trying to hear something from God tell me, no, this isn't the right way. This isn't the right, you know. I mean, I think I even talked about it in that letter or in one of my other posts. I mean, I showed up there when my kids were there, when my daughters were there, and I hid from them because I knew I couldn't let them see me the way I was in. I knew right then that if I saw my kids, I wouldn't go through with it. And I was determined. And I hid like a coward, you know. So it's just it's one of those things where, you know, where you take my childhood, right, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. You take my time in the military, you take my time as a police officer, and it's all what I tell people is I've just been graciously blessed by God to have endured such events to put me in the position that I'm in now. You know, and it's been hell to get here. I have fought tooth and nail to get to where I'm at now. And every day is still a test for me. You know, they say the closer you get to God, the more the enemy attacks you. And that couldn't be truer. You know, I mean, I've just this past 2 weeks, I've had all types of things thrown at me. You know, I'm working with I just got brought on by Flanders Fields, who, you know, who Ben Owen's the president of. And so you know what that organization is about, but he brought me on as the director of suicide prevention, veteran suicide prevention. So, you know, and on top of that, I'm dealing with the death of a great man who just lost the battle to cancer. So I've got all these things being thrown at me, and at the same time, it's what I've learned is how to turn down the noise. You know, I won't overcommit to things now, you know, and that's just the way I have to be. So, you know, to get started with this, it's first I'm going to talk about my childhood because that's where it started. I mean, my childhood was something you would, you know, read about or see on the ID channel per se. You know, by the time I was 6, I'd been kidnapped 3 times by my biological father. He was a Marine vet, Force Recon. He did 3 consecutive tours in Vietnam. He was voted most likely to succeed in high school, but something changed with him during the war. And looking back now, I mean, it took me almost 40 years to stand in front of that man face to face because of the feelings that I had towards him. But when I stopped looking at the bad and when I stopped focusing on the bad, and that's what you'll hear me talk about a lot, I started to see the good in things. Not the good of what happened to me while I was kidnapped, or not the good that I witnessed as a child. You know, mom getting smacked around, my sister, me, you know, the cops being called to the house. That's one of the things that, you know, I started to focus on the good. And that's why I say I'm graciously blessed, because had God not allowed me to endure that and survive it, I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. I write the things that I write not to gain attention, not to get the poor, you know, that, you know, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm not sorry about it. And I don't want anybody else to feel sorry about it, because it's made me who I am. I tell the story and I tell events about my life because somewhere there's someone who is sitting there going through something similar. And if I can provide a little bit of hope to get them to turn to God, to see how easy it really is, we make it difficult on ourselves. God's always the easy answer, but we like to figure things out on our own, per se. It's the hard-headedness in us. So, you know, getting back to the childhood, it was, you know, I can tell you specifically details the last time I was taken, specific details. Matter of fact, before I moved out to Nebraska, I had a conversation with my dad about it where he was like, man, I can't believe you remembered that. The bad things never go away, and that's what people don't understand. We learn to overcome them, but they're never going to go away completely. It's how we deal with them. That's the thing that changes us. So that night or that morning, my mom was actually in the process of moving into a new apartment. The man that was helping her is actually the man who raised me as a son. He adopted me at the age of, I think it was 11. When I asked him, I took his name. But that day, my biological dad showed up, and instantly I knew something bad was going to happen. And he said, I want to take, my kids out to go get ice cream, referring to my sister and I. I voluntarily said, I'll go, because he didn't really focus a lot of his attention on me because I was his son. Now, there were times where that attention was put directly on me, or I stood in front of my mom or my sister. But that day, we get in the car, and the first thing he did was looked at me, and his black Monte Carlo had a Roadrunner beep beep dashboard cover. And he looked at me and said, that's the last time you're ever going to see your mom again. And in my mind, it's just like, even then I can tell you, well, thank God she's not going to have to, she won't get hurt anymore. It's always been my thing. My mom was my best friend. I feared her over God growing up as a kid, like I've seen what she went through. I saw what she endured. So it was, if I could take that off of her, then that's what I was going to do. But, it wasn't until I found, when I reconnected with him, the last time I saw him I was 6 years old, and then I reconnected with him when I was 40. I'll be 43 this year, 40, and I'll be 43 this year. And it took me that long to do it. And when I did, I cried. I saw how broken he was. I keep in mind, my mom had passed away a couple of years ago, and I was pissed at God. I'm not going to lie. I was mad. I wasn't in the right headspace. How did he take her? That was one of my why questions that I talk so against. Whys. Why do we ask God why all the time? But it's, when I saw him, everything started to come back to me. But I sat there and I cried. I saw how broken he was. I saw, physically broken, mentally broken. And so, that night, man, we talked and we talked and we talked some more. And I got to hear some of the war stories, and I had a better understanding. Didn't make it right by any means. He's a grown man. He knows better. He passed away, but he knew better. But I started to have that, I can understand this because I'm there myself. I've never touched. I would never do the things that happened to my mom. I would never do that to a woman. It's something I despise. But but again, finding that forgiveness in him was one of the hardest things that I've had to do, because I hated him for so long. When he took me, I found out that we went to Colorado, where his Marine buddies kind of hit us, per se, because we were gone for a couple of months. And while we were there, he was too drunk to realize what was happening to me. His Marine sons, he was I think he was 18. That's when the molestation started. My dad would be passed out drunk and these things are happening to me. That's when I first got raped. Forced to do things to another child about my age at the time while people watched. That was the type of stuff that I went through. Not a day that goes by or has gone by that's not something that will come up in my head. And for a long time, I struggled with it, even as a kid. God, I was a hellion. It really was. I was hell on wheels. In first grade, I got, this was back when the parents signed the permission slip so the principal could swat you. Yeah, my parents signed that one and I earned like 6 swats from my principal. But, Mr. Tewksbury, I'll never forget him. But it's that thing that's inside me that continues to drive my passion for this, my passion for reaching out to what God calls and Jesus calls the lost sheep, the black sheep, who think that that they have no hope because somebody might judge them for what they've done or what's been done to them. And that's my biggest thing to people is if you are here today, that means there's still fight left in you. If you're here today, no matter how tragic or how traumatic the event was, you lived. You survived it. And that's something that took me a long time to figure out. And I would hate for somebody to make the same mistakes I am. I mean, I talk more about my failures than I do about my success. You walk into my house, you'd never know that I was in the military. I don't have an I love me wall. You would never know I was a cop. You wouldn't see any of the awards that I got as a cop. I look at that stuff. Now, granted, I loved what I did in the military and I absolutely loved being a cop. But those were some of the darkest times in my life. And for me, it's getting rid of that stuff. Like my retirement stuff isn't up there. All my medals, nothing. I gave that away. My daughters have that stuff. Because to me, those were failures in life that I just so happened to overcome because I was good at my job. So, my childhood, here's something that, a lot of people don't know is when I was born, I wasn't born Jonathon Alcocer. I was born Louis. I was named after my dad, Louis Jonathan Castro. My mom would never call me Louis. She always called me Jonathan. And then when the man that she married after, when he adopted me, I took his name. My first name's actually Francisco, but I only go by Jonathan. That's all my family's has ever called me is Jonathan. Not one person in my family has ever called me Francisco. Everybody in the military has called me Frankie. Nobody called me Jonathan. My military family called me Frankie. My family always called me Jonathan. My family hated Frankie. And for good reason. I hated him too. It was just one of those things where it's not one of those split personalities or anything. Don't get me wrong. It's just that became that everything that I did, on a personal level, in the military, whatever, was all geared towards something else. I would look for ways to die. You don't get 10 deployments without volunteering for a few. I see right now, Chris Piscaglio is on the phone right now. This guy has been my mentor and has been somebody who I have highly admired, who has seen me at my worst. And Chris, feel free at the end, I don't care what you tell these people. That is somebody right now that has seen me at my absolute worst. But it all started from childhood. It all did. And it's one of those things where, back then they didn't really know how to deal with it. My parents didn't know how to deal with it, but I was also good at lying. My dad didn't find out about it until I was till 40 before I moved out here to Nebraska. My mom knew. I told my mom everything. She was the only person that I've ever trusted completely, wholeheartedly. So I get kidnapped or whatever for the last time, and one of the things that always and up until recently that I'd always struggled with was, if had it been my child that had been taken from me, there's no way there's nobody on this earth that would ever stop me from finding him. Well, after I was taken, my mom, my dad, and my sister moved to Michigan because of the situation that was going on back in Arizona. And that was one thing that I kick myself in the butt now because I mean my mom passed away a few years ago, and that's one thing that I never asked her was why. But I figured out my own why. Had she had not moved to Michigan, had taken my sister, what would have been the outcome? Had she had not done that, I wouldn't have gone through the things that gone through as a child. So I look at it now as a gift. I'm not mad at my mom. I'm not mad at my dad for packing up and moving to another state. Now, there was times where it made me sick to my stomach to think about, even as an adult, much less a child. So it was, as I've come to peace with all that stuff, it's again, and you'll hear me talk about it some more, but I've always taught and preached, and I've always told people, you have got to focus. You got to stop focusing on the bad and start turning to the good. Look for the good. There's always going to be a good in any situation. Here I am telling a bunch of strangers, people I've never even met, the things that have happened to me. I'm explaining some intimate details, and it's that talking about it that helps. And it's allowed me to see the good and the bad. We get so caught up in this, in our daddy's stigmas back in the day, men don't talk about their feelings, boys don't cry. I can't tell you, excuse my language, how many times I got called a pussy for crying. So you just learn to push it back down. You don't show any weakness. That's not what men do. That's not what boys do. Well, unfortunately, it started to break me. I ran away from home. I was constantly getting into fights, or I got jumped a couple of times. It's because I didn't care, even as a kid. I didn't care. Suicide came into my mind at 12 because not only had I been molested by people who were supposed to look out for me, but then you got my karate instructor, Mr. Kennard. I'll always remember his name. Now, granted, he got jammed up, got caught up. My parents came to me, did it ever happen to you? My first response was no. Because of the fact that whenever I tried to talk about stuff, I would get in trouble for it. That's not something to talk about in the house. That's not something that we do. That's done. What's done is done. Sorry, in my mind, it wasn't. I was having nightmares. And then you throw on the Catholic priest during confessions. I mean, I was an altar boy. I walked away from catechism classes, walked right out because I finally got tired of it, and walked home. We lived right across the street from the church. And I told my mom what was going on. And the next weekend, because even back then I had a love for God. I loved going to church. She took me to a church called Calvary, which is coincidentally where I work now. And not at the same church, the Calvary, Nebraska. I grew up in Arizona. But I mean, when I came to this church where I'm at now, I fell in love with the place. It was like, this is home to me. This is home. And, I started to actually pursue what I've been called to do. So then, my childhood was, I had a great childhood. I'm not going to lie. Did the early parts suck? Yeah, absolutely. My childhood was full of discipline. My dad, bless his heart. Just so you know, my dad and I, we don't talk right now. I demolished that relationship. And that is something that I am actively trying to rebuild, because before I moved out to Nebraska, things just went sideways for me. But it's, the discipline that my dad instilled in me plays a big part of who I am today. Now granted, I look back at some of the things that he did, to discipline. Was it the best? No. But here's a man who's 22 years old who just inherited 2 kids. He's still a kid himself. So he didn't know how to deal with me. He didn't know how to deal with that trauma. Here's a man, and you got to understand, like, I've watched men attack my mom, my sister, me, other family members. Who is this man that's going to come in here and tell me what to do? But looking back on it now, I watched him progress, and being an adult, I can look back and pinpoint certain things, right? How did he handle me when I ran away? Well, he took me to a park next to a lake, Litchfield Park, and just sat down with me and had a talk with me. And that's one of the conversations that I'll never forget. That's one of the moments with my dad I'll never forget. And granted, again, we don't talk. And one day we will. I know that, but not right now. I destroyed it. The damage that I did before I left was almost non-fixable. I mean, I'm man enough to admit that. It was all my fault. Nothing that people did to me caused me to break down the way I did before I moved out here. But then at 16, like I said, suicide came into my mind at 12. At 16, I made a plan. And it was one of those things where I was just so fed up with the night terrors. I was so broken on the thoughts that were coming into my head. I didn't know how to deal with it. And, I played nothing but sports growing up. So there'd be times where I'd be on the football field, and every time I hit somebody, that's who I'm picturing, a different person, somebody else that hit me, somebody else that hurt me. That's who I'm picturing now. I had a violent temper, violent one. And then, there would be times where I just wasn't in the mood. So, but again, my childhood was great. I had very supportive parents. My dad was my mom's best friend. My mom was my dad's best friend, and I saw them go through things, and they really instilled that, that drive where I get my drive now. So, initially my childhood sucked. I mean, the early stages where our minds are developing, where we are seeing, where what we are seeing, we absorb like a sponge, and that was, so I was broken. But it was back then, parents didn't really deal with that. It's not like it is today. Did I have some issues going on back then? Absolutely. But at the same time, it was just, it was a different time. It was a different generation. Boys don't talk like that. It's just, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I'm very blessed to have the childhood that I did. And I got to see my dad grow as he became a father. My mom and him had two sons of their own. And it's interesting, when I sit back and take a look at things, that I watched how my dad raised my brothers, and compared to the way he raised my sister and I. It wasn't that he didn't love us anymore, any different. He loved us all the same. He loves us all the same. It's just the fact that he started to pick up different things, what worked with me, what worked with my sister. And he changed the path. And that's something that I've always admired in him. I've always admired. But then, after high school, I went straight into the military. I didn't take a break. I graduated in May, and boom, June, I had enlisted. And the very first thing right out the gates, I got a deployment. After going through basic training, after going through tech school, I caught a deployment to San Vito and to Kosovo, and that was where my addiction started. I loved deploying, absolutely loved it. There's a feeling about deployments, and those that have served, can tell you the same thing. That the deployment itself is a rush, and depending on where you're at. Now, granted, now don't get me wrong, there were deployments that I were on that were just cakewalks. I mean, they were vacations, uh, but it's just once you get it in you, then that becomes the only thing that you want to do. And that's how I looked at my career. I mean, after I got the first taste of it, it was just, I want to go on more, bring on some more. This was so much fun. I want to go somewhere more dangerous. I want to go somewhere, where we can get into things. I was always seeking that adrenaline. And my dad would be the first one to tell you that was my addiction. I was addicted to deploying because I loved it so much. It gave me a break from the natural world. I don't, when you're deployed, you only have one thing to worry about is make sure you come home, protect your brothers and sisters around you, and then get your butt home. And that's, as the more I deployed and the more places I went, and when I became a dad, that's when things started to change. So my oldest, Kylie, she's 17. Yeah, just turned 17. She's a senior in high school right now, and I can remember the very first day the very first time I held her. I just looked down at her, and it was just like, I will never ever treat you like I was treated. I will always protect you. She became my rock. Unfortunately, that term, because I've used it, has created a disconnect between her and I. But I left a month after she was born. And during that deployment, I had to bring two of my best friends home, Brian McElroy and Jason Norton. And that was a tough one. And so I bring them back home and then have to turn around and deploy and finish out my deployment. So, the trauma that I went through during deployments, losing friends, the combat stuff. When you see it and it comes into you and it becomes who you are, life doesn't really make sense. The only thing that makes sense is what you know and what you love. And for me, I would come home and already be looking to go back. How do I volunteer for another one? Chris can tell you. I don't know how many times I've gone to his office and was like, I need another deployment. So it's just one of those things where it goes back to why I say God has graciously blessed me to endure and to endure the things that I've seen and have done and have had to do and have been done to me. I'll always explain to people, my worst and best deployment was 2012, and that was in Afghanistan. It was the worst because of the things that happened, but the best because of the guys that was there. And that deployment specifically really, really messed me up. And I remember when I came home from deployment, Chris actually sat down with me and said, you're going to do your post-health deployment assessment. You're going to answer it honestly. Because he was seeing the pictures. I would send him pictures back home through the secure messaging. And he said, you're going to answer these questions honestly. And I said, you know what that means? He goes, yeah, I know exactly what it means. So I answered it. And, the next thing you know, my rifle, my pistol, I'm being de-armed. I can't carry a weapon, and rightfully so. But it was, had he not done that, it would have been another lie, and he knows that. So, when I talk about the military stuff, and when I talk about the trauma and that comes with that, a lot of people ask me, why is it just vets? And I tell them it's not just vets. I target active duty as well because that's where the problem starts. The problem starts when we're on active duty. It just gets bigger when we get out because of the way it's handled, the way we handle things. And I know again, I'm talking a lot about Chris, but it's just one of those things where had he had not done what he did, I don't know what it would have happened, because it started a chain reaction for me. It started a chain reaction where I would go from counselor to counselor. I mean, within less than a year, I'd seen 7 different therapists, because I would get one and they would be like, well, I don't know how to treat this. I'm going to send you to a different doc. Okay, well, it sounds like you need to go see this doctor. And at one point, I had an active duty captain. He's like, well, what are you doing to help your sleep? I said, well, I'm going to the gym a lot. I'll break my body down to where all I can do is sleep. He goes, well, what if I took the gym away from you? And I said, I'd probably punch you in your freaking face. Well, it sounds like you have anger issues. What gave that away? So that's how the military handled it, right? It was bouncing me around from different doc to different doc. And unfortunately, that is what happens. I mean, and they can't figure out why 22 vets a day kill themselves. To the military, it's like, that's why is the grass green? You can't figure that out. We know the answer to the why is the grass green. The answer is in front of them. They just choose not to do anything about it. Now it's gotten better. But is it where it needs to be? In my opinion, no, it's not. And it's going to take a lot of work before it gets there. So all throughout this, I've battled and I've struggled with my faith. Every time I have walked away from God, I've been pulled right back. Something will happen and it's just like, okay, is it really this easy? And that's what I try and tell people. Yes, it is. When you let go of control because we think we know best, when we let go of that control and actually turn it over to God, life becomes so easy. And I'm walking living proof of that. I wouldn't be where I'm at without God. Now he has placed some tremendous people in my life. Tremendous people. And I can't say it enough, but there's nothing that I've done. And it's just like I told you when you said, you're an answer to a prayer. In my eyes, I'm just another dude going through life like everybody else. Only this is what works for me. This is what has saved me. It's always been my faith. Throughout all the deployments, throughout, losing my mom, this and that, I've always been pulled back. I can't tell you how many times I've stopped and started college for Christian ministry. I'll start and I'll stop it. And I'll try and do my own thing. And then I'm just right back to it. And so that's why I do what I do now. That's part of the ministry that I'm building right now. It's part of it's everything. It's the only reason why I do what I do. And it's to help those that think that suicide is the only way out. Help those answer their own why questions. Why, God, did you allow this to happen? Why? Tell people, stop asking why and start asking, what can I do about this? Why not me? Who better than me? And that's what I think when people start to look at that, and they stop focusing on so much. We get so hyper focused on the bad, so hyper focused that the good seems out of reach, non-existent. So that's why, that's why I do the things that I do. Now, I'm getting ready to prepare for one of the biggest presentations that I've ever had to do, and it's to incorporate grit ministry within my church. Grit ministry is something, it's a 2-part entity. It's something that I think every church needs, because more often than not, you're not going to get these hard talks. You're not going to get the sermons that address certain things. You might pick up certain things, but I focus on me sitting in the back of the church, knowing exactly what I was about to do. That's who I try and reach. And that's why I keep things real. That's why I keep things raw. I don't know everything about the Bible. I mean, I'm starting another Bible class tonight where where I'm the proctors, I've been told, is one of the best instructors to ever teach the Bible. He said, if I want to get in the weeds of the Bible, this is a guy to listen to. So that's what I did. I'm constantly reading, constantly learning. And, I make mistakes just like everybody else. There's times where I still try and do things my way. And that doesn't end up good, So I know I've talked a lot. This is something that I'm passionate about. And like I told you, like, I hate talking about me. I'll tell you all my failures before I tell you all the success that I've had, just in hopes that if somebody else hears it, okay, let me try this way. Because when I've asked people, well, have you ever tried? Have you ever gone all in on God? Have you ever? Well, sometimes, I pray. Well, how are you supposed to have a relationship with somebody? Doesn't matter who, if you only spend 5 minutes with that person. God is no different. The more we spend time with him, the more we pray to him, the more we read, the more our questions get answered. We start to answer our own why questions. I'll never forget, somebody once told me that, it just actually recently, how do you expect to have a relationship with somebody that you only spend 5 minutes with? And the answer is you're never going to have that relationship. It's just, but we're in a rush to do things our way, and we can't figure out why God is disciplining us the way he does. So it's just, I was I was so nervous to do this, not gonna lie, because there's so much to talk about, and it's just one of those things where, I didn't talk about certain things, but you'll read about them. Like the letter that I'm getting ready to put out, you're going to read about the night that I tried to do suicide by cop when I was a cop. That's what happened. I hit my breaking point. I hit it. And the sad thing about it is the guys who showed up that night I'd worked with. It was a small town. And that's something that I'll never forget, but the way those guys handled it, they do how to deal with suicidal veterans because of me. It's just one of those things where it's just, if I can help somebody, if I can help them, point them in the right direction, which is God. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge advocate. If you're in need for help, you get to help. God created that person for a reason. That is a gift that God gave to them. But people look at counselors and they're like, no, I don't want to talk to them. He's weak. I don't want to take the medication. I take my happy pills. But that's what works for me. It's not always about prayer. Prayer is part of it, and following everything else, I don't know what else. So if you guys got any
Jonathan,
questions,
thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you just coming on. This is what it's about. It's like having coffee and conversation with friends. And you just came and you just shared so much. And I want to thank you for bringing your whole self, because that is what people can relate to. That's what people can connect to. That's what gives people hope. And I do want to open it up. I do want to ask you, though, two things. Like, what advice would you give your law enforcement self when you were at your wit's end? And what advice would you give people in how to make that first step to get to know God?
To my law enforcement self, don't overwork. Don't overwork, because that's what broke me. The night before, the night that I had my one of my attempts where I tried to go suicide by cop, I finished just 18 straight days of work. So and we do it because the money's great, and we don't want to let another shift down. because our beats get busy. And, so it's my advice to that. I mean, again, just watch your workload. And then it's to reach out, to stop compartmentalizing everything that we do. The calls that that law enforcement officers go to, them firefighters, they see some of the worst, the nastiest things that your neighbor next door will never see. They've seen things that, people on this that are on here right now will never see. And we expect them to go in and do this day in and day out and come out of it with unscarred. That's an unrealistic expectation. So I think, I miss being a cop, but I'll be honest with you, I couldn't be a cop in today's society. I mean, I got cleared to go back to work. Wasn't in God's plan. But at the same time, I already knew how to beat the system. Just like every other cop out there knows how to beat the system. And that's the thing, if in the military, if you self-identify that you need help, a lot of times that follows you throughout your career. And a lot of times, and that's where, I guess that's where my biggest piece of advice is: screw your career. You can't help others if you can't help yourself. And talking about it is a form of therapy, because you stop giving control of the demons that are putting you in these dark places. If I could sit down with a room of law enforcement, my biggest thing, or military for that matter, my biggest thing would be talk. Quit thinking you're Billy Badass and that holding it down makes you more of a man, because it's killing you slowly but surely. And eventually it creeps up and it gets the strongest of people. And to point them back to God, I've always been a huge advocate. And there's somebody that one of the Bible plans that I read, actually the guy, I can't remember the author, but I'll never forget the comment is, he never advocates reading the Bible when you're feeling a certain way. If you're sad, depressed, if you're happy, read the Bible all day. But when you're sad and depressed, you might be disappointed in what you hear and what you read, because you might choose to start off in the Old Testament, which is where I tell people, you want to see how angry God can be, read the Old Testament. You want to see how loving and kind he can be, read the New Testament. But we are taught to fear God. And if you want to learn what fear is, read the Old Testament. Don't worry about Revelation. Revelation is a beautiful thing. People are more worried about Revelation than they are the Old Testament. I'm sorry, but that's God's wrath. So I always tell people, don't read the Bible if you're depressed. Pray. Because you might misinterpret. You might miss what God is actually trying to tell you, because you're not in the right mindset to read it. Pray, wait, and listen. It develops patience, which is something that I struggle with on a daily basis, patience. But it's one of those things where, when we go into it and we actually pray, when we're praying for the right things, and we stop asking why. Because I'm sorry to break the news to you, but we will never know why God does what he does. We may think we know why, but then he may put something right in front of us that tells us something different. Pray and shut your mouth and listen. Then slowly start to work your way back in. People will trip, stumble, and fall. I will proudly boast about the fact that I am one of the biggest sinners that have ever walked this world, but I am still here. And I have found my way back to him yet again, and the ride has been amazing.
That's great. Jonathan, thank you. Before we go to Paul, I know Papa Ron, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to say something, or do you want to go to Paul?
Yeah, Jonathan, I just absolutely respect you to no end. I mean, you can't be real without being raw.
Exactly.
And living life on this side of the grave is a lot of times raw, very raw. And but Chris, it's Biscaglio.
Yeah.
You talked about, a long time. I mean, it takes people that have the time, make the time, and will spend the time, because you can't go through. My experience and what I hear you saying is you need someone that'll put up with you when you can't put up with yourself, and do it for a long time. And that endurance, you can't go deep without going long, and I just appreciate you emphasizing that in this day and age when people, yeah, I got to go, I got to get to a meeting, got to do this thing, and can't spend the time. I mean, that is the death of relationships right there.
Yeah. It really is. And that's, and Chris and I, I mean, before I even went to Afghanistan, we almost came to blows in his office. I mean, that's the type of brotherly love that we had. But he made the effort. And, when I was in Afghanistan, dude, we apologized to each other. And I knew where he was coming from. Going into that deployment, my head wasn't right as it was. I still had a few screws loose from other deployments. So, but he is definitely one person that I can honestly say, who I would say knows me more than anybody else. I mean, other than those that are extremely close to me. But it's that man right there. There's not enough I could say about him. He definitely kept me raw and real.
Great. Thank
That
you.
kept me, you kept me raw and real as well, Frankie. So brother, it's good to see you again. I haven't seen your face in a little bit. So I know we talk quite a bit, but it's good to see your face again. And I love you, brother. Love what you're saying, what you're doing. And just so everybody out there knows, he saved me as well. So this was not a one-sided thing at all. So thank you, brother. It's good to see you. Definitely.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing, Chris. Oh gosh, Paul. Oh, Paul, you're muted.
It's what happens when you get old, you forget. In any event, I want to say to you how much I appreciate the depth that you went into to explain your life. That, there is a saying, and I don't know where this comes from, but it's essentially, if God will lead you to it, he will bring you through it. And if you're not the epitome of that, I don't know who is. From the time you were a toddler until your present age, you've been through a lot. You have literally had your head beaten against the wall when you couldn't figure out why somebody was doing that to you. And because you weren't old enough to try to understand what was going on.
Yeah.
And as to losing somebody in your arms, that really touched me because I had it happen to me. And I received a call and I was out in an unmarked unit rolling down a hill toward that address. Couldn't have got there any quicker. It was only 3 houses away. I literally stopped the car in the middle of the street, jumped out, and ran up this flight of stairs to the apartment. And here is a guy on the floor choking from a chicken bone that he'd swallowed. I gave him the Heimlich maneuver, and that didn't work. And so I gave it to him harder, and that didn't work. And I realized I was going to break his ribs if I kept doing it. And so I started giving him CPR, and he never made it.
Yeah.
And so I understand about that, and I tell you that perhaps to tell you that you and I are not the only people that it's happened to, but once you've had the experience, you never ever forget it. And I told a kid drowning out of a pool, and almost had the same thing happen a second time.
Yeah.
He was so close that I jumped in with my duty belt on, which is a stupid thing to do, but I needed to get that kid out of that water.
Yeah.
And got him up and started hammering his abdomen to get him to spit water out, which he did. And then in a couple of minutes, he started breathing again, but he apparently had some brain damage from lack of oxygen. And so in any event, I appreciate what you shared. I appreciate the value that you bring to people, because it gives them the single last thing they can have, and that is hope.
Yeah.
And that's hope by example, and it's hope by the crucible. Because your experience was forged in a foundry, and it was hot and it was miserable, and you came through it. And by saying that, I'm telling you that your message was going to resonate with a lot of people, and we hope to see you back on here again.
I appreciate that. And that's, and that's one of the biggest things that I really encourage people. And I'm always talking about it online, but it's stop holding it to yourself. Share those experiences with others, because you don't know how your story might save somebody else. I mean, you just shared something with us where, where we have something similar in common. And you're absolutely right that we're not the only two. That has happened to numerous people, and it scars you, but it also strengthens you at the same time. Because at that point, one of the biggest things that I've really had to tell myself is, and what I tell people now, I can't save them all. The rest I turn to God. I save the ones that I can, and the rest I turn over to God. If I can help somebody find their way back to God, I know He's got it in control at that point. There's nothing more that I can say we're gonna do. I'm just another dude.
if being a believer had muscles, I'd be a champion weightlifter. Fortunately, it doesn't require muscles.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. Before we go to Terry, I do want to tell you, Jonathan, after I read your letter on LinkedIn, somebody else messaged me and sent me the same letter. And this person, it is uncanny how his story is your story.
Yeah.
And I'll introduce you. He couldn't come on today, but it is uncanny. And so again, the more that we share our stories, the more connection there is, the more that we know we're not alone.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that introduction. So yeah, thanks again for being so raw, so vulnerable, and giving the language to other people who have gone through similar things. So, Terry.
Jonathan, thank you for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank you for your service, not only for the military, but as an officer. Totally identify with a lot of the things that you shared, and being in that really dark place. And I love the fact that you were able to actually bring it to the forefront and share your story in that, because it ultimately will help others.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to put out there as one of the things that I do as a result, I'm a contracted coach with 22-0. And
a lot about you.
Okay, I would love if you, and I'm guessing Chris, could utilize the service. I would actually love to work with you guys if you felt comfortable going through it. If you felt you needed it, I could actually do a one-to-one. I can do the assessment, find out what your scores are, and work with you.
It's so funny that you mentioned it, because there's a man that I'm working with named Greg Hat. So he runs an organization called nohomelessvets.org. And he and I were just talking about that, because he was like, man, you really got to try this out. He goes, I've had him do it to me. He goes, this is a type of thing that he's located in Sidney, Nebraska. And he currently is getting ready to, he has a few units open right now, but he owns 77 housing units where he can put homeless vets. Now, Chris was a force recon Marine, and he and I kind of hit it off like two peas in a pod. And but he literally last week, we had just talked about this, and this is something that that I'm bringing to the nonprofit that I'm currently working with, Flanders Fields, because what Flanders Fields does is they take homeless vets, dope addicted vets, and they get them off the streets, they get them helped out, they get them clean, and then they put them to a mission. They've got guys in Ukraine right now that are dismantling bombs. They're EOD techs that were broken, again, and that's why I've always said that the problem starts on active duty, it just grows bigger. And it doesn't matter whether, and the same thing happens as a law enforcement officer. The problem is actively happening while you're working.
Mm-hmm.
We deal with it when we're off duty, and how we deal with it is what breaks us. And that's the biggest thing that I push out to people. My brother and I, we actually put together a 15-minute video that's all specifically geared towards veterans and first responder, police, and fire suicide. So I have a 15-minute video of just that is all part of the presentation. I'm going to put it out there because I mean, my brother did a fantastic job with it, but it's just one of those things where the reason why I'm pushing for this ministry is because every church has a cop. Every church has a vet. If we know that there's a problem and we're not doing anything about it, how are we becoming a solution to that problem?
Correct.
We're not. It's just like we're almost like condoning the behavior still.
Right. If we're not part of the solution, then we're a part of the problem.
Part of the problem. Exactly.
Yeah. And the thing is that even with 22-0, with the trauma resiliency protocol and the emotional management process, every year I retired December 31st of 2019, 14 months shy of my 32.
Mm.
And every year my anniversary was coming up, my world was going dark on me. And literally I got to the point that I was waking up in tears from the nightmares, the ruminating thoughts. And the only time I was literally at peace was when I was thinking of taking my own life.
Exactly.
And 4 sessions later, and
there's something peaceful about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that being said, and then obviously I was able to actually find a counselor that specializes with first responders. But 22-0 and going through that process is what really, I want to say, catapulted me past that wanting to, like, I've had enough. I don't want to fight this anymore.
Yeah. No.
So
would you say in your profession and what you do now, I mean, I know that you can see it as a cop and that you've seen it as a cop, and the reason I ask is because I've worked with a lot of vets where the trauma has started in the childhood.
yes.
And then it's why we choose the professions that we do. I chose to be a cop so I can help children. Yeah. and help women and that are being, that are going through domestic violence and things like that. I accomplished everything that I wanted to do as a cop. Right. But now, I mean, since that letter came out, I mean, I'm talking with somebody right now who was molested by his own father.
Mm.
Right? So my question is back to you, would that be somebody, he's not a vet or a first responder,
Yes.
he's homeless right now. I'm getting ready to put him inside of a house through that no homeless vet. This guy's gonna put him inside of a house, but that's something that he needs therapy on. Would I be able to point him to you?
Yes. And
Okay.
he has no funds, correct?
No.
I'll work with him.
Okay.
I'll take him on.
Awesome.
Yeah, I will, I'm gonna share my phone number in the in the chat.
Okay.
So take my number and
Okay.
you and I can talk. And then I'll work with him for free. I'll take him.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna share my info.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Terry. And just to let you know, Jonathan, on the first responder group, Thursday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time,
Yeah.
I think almost everybody on that group, that tends to be a larger group than this one. Everybody's gone through the 22-0. And seems, I don't know, I have seen Terry change. You know, she's the queen of dad jokes. We always tease her about that. She's always joking around, but it's been really great to see people just have joy again.
Yeah.
So it's just been great how that happens. And I do want to get Papa Ron in there. Papa Ron.
Yeah, I've got, well, I want to just like put everything aside, and work so gets in the way of what I want to do. Jonathan,
Yeah.
I have a meeting that I'm actually leading for substance use prevention, and I got to get out of here at 2:30. I put in the chat Job 23:10, and it says, "When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold."
Mhm.
And my wife is a fan of Forged in Steel, and you'd think I would be the guy, but it takes a lot of heat to purify metals, and so the deep metal that many of folks like you,
Mhm.
and I will include everyone else in this call, including me, the incredible firing it takes to purify metals and get rid of all of those things is a beautiful and a terrifying and a tough process.
Yeah.
And I just appreciate that you stood the trying, that great heat, because I really detect in you someone who has let go of the control and quit trying to do it on your own.
Okay.
And when you give up control, all of a sudden, God has command then. So, but just that Job 23:10, there's even a song, when I've been tried and purified, I shall come forth as gold. And I just reminded me of that song and that verse. So I just appreciate you for that, and certainly do respect you for the work you do.
Well said,
Thank
Papa
you. I
Ron.
appreciate that. I really.
Yeah, I love that. Jonathan, it has been such a pleasure to have you on, and I really hope that you will just join us whenever you can, or come share your story to another group. You really are somebody who's bringing hope, because you have courage. You have courage to embrace faith after some huge difficulties in life, and somebody who's willing to share your story so in such a raw way to be able to connect.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And, back to Papa Ron real quick. It wasn't, this was no easy ride for sure. And it was, it's something that, even recently, like I really had to pull myself up. When I found out that my buddy Lance, his name was Lance Keller, struggled, he fought cancer. And just taken way too young, I could feel myself going down a loophole that I knew. Lance was an amazing man. He touched so many people's lives, and I was trying to focus on the good in his passing. You know, I mean, this dude, he's part of the reason why, you know, I'm getting ready to sit down with some people and launch a foundation where I'm going to call it Lamb of God, where it's where it stands for Lance and Mama Bridget. My mom's name was Bridget. The Lamb of God Foundation, where it's going to be, where my total focus on it is, you know, the kids of the vets that have taken their own lives, the kids of the vets have lost the battle to cancer, because the kind of the military kind of goes away after that, after a certain point, right? But who's left to take care of the kids?
Right.
So that's one of the things that I'm, you know, and it's all because of that, you know.
Yeah. You mentioned that. I mean, you mentioned in your thing, every church has a veteran, every church has a police officer. I'd like to reframe that and build on that, that every church has children and spouses and loved ones
Exactly.
of that veteran and law officer. And you show that how that, I mean, when you really come alongside and there's a Jonathan that gets purified, there are family and loved ones that benefit from that purification process too. So, you know, I don't know if you want to or not, but please add that to your line when you say there's a vet in that.
Oh,
Because
no,
it's,
definitely.
yeah, I mean, spouses and veterans and their families, they transition out of the military and out off of law enforcement too.
They serve right along with us. They really do.
A great conversation. And Jonathan, I'm so sorry about the week that you've had too with the losses. That's really heartbreaking. And I think that the families are fortunate to have you, and I hope you have time to just be able to heal, to do what you need to do, to take care of yourself too.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I sent an invite on LinkedIn, Jonathan.
Okay, cool. Thank
You
you.
know, if you need some time, as soon as I'm not working it, I will take the time and go the distance. So
Yeah.
Papa Ron is awesome. I guess everybody is on this group. I tell you, I'm so grateful for them. Thank you, Papa Ron. He's gone. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. Does anybody have any last comments before we say goodbye here?
I'm gonna send you a request on LinkedIn too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And I'll be in touch with you soon.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
John, do you have any closing words that you want us to walk away with here?
You know, it's one thing. My biggest thing is, you know, there's an old saying when it comes to raising kids, it takes a village, right? And the same couldn't be true about when we're trying to help those who are lost, who are hurting, who have found themselves in those dark places. It really does. And so, you know, I encourage, you know, if don't be afraid, and make sure you encourage other people. Don't be afraid to share the things that have almost killed you. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable, because you never know whose life you might save. You never know who just might needed to hear that. You know, that's one of the biggest things that I could always sing and always pray. I promise you, he listens. And that's the one thing that we really need to drive home. Turning it over to God is one of the easiest things that we can do. We make it more difficult than it has to be.
I concur with that part for sure. Jonathan, thank you. What a blessing you are. I don't even have the words to say it. I'm very grateful for just who you are and what you have embraced. That takes courage. And now you are truly helping so many others. So I want to thank you.